You taste like ozone and desperation. Did you know that? The moment he heard her voice, Car's pulse slammed against his ears, as though something primal inside him recognized danger and attraction in equal measure. He tried to speak, but words stuck to the roof of his mouth, thick as honey. The alien female, her skin in iridescent lavender, stood only a meter from him, the faint luminescent patterns on her neck pulsing in time with her own quickened breath. She had bitten him minutes earlier. It had been a startling moment, a half-playful, half-threatening gesture, and it left a throbbing puncture on his forearm. Adrenaline still coursed through his veins, and he wondered if her species had venom. She pressed closer, inhaling the space around him as if cataloging all his secrets. Her pupilless eyes, like shifting pools of silver, flickered in the dim corridor of the abandoned outpost. Neither had planned this meeting. Carr had been hired to pilot a battered cargo shuttle across a system on the edge of corporate space. Routine job, minimal pay. He hadn't expected to find an alien woman rummaging through an emergency supply chest at the old station, nor had he expected her to tackle him the moment they locked eyes, pin him beneath her surprisingly powerful limbs, and sink sharp teeth into his flesh. "I'm sorry," she had whispered afterward, releasing his arm. "It was a joke where I come from." Her voice trembled slightly then, as though even she wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. The pressure in that bite still tingled through him, and he stared at the twin marks she left. Something hot, something undeniably alive, coursed from her into him. "A joke?" he managed to say at last, ignoring the pain. "You have a pretty twisted sense of humor. You have a pretty tender sense of skin." She shrugged, a gesture that caused the translucent spines along her shoulders to flare. "We can blame the environment. If you hadn't startled me, it wouldn't have happened." Carr wanted to argue. Maybe she was lying, or maybe she was telling the truth in a way that made no sense to humans. But he couldn't deny the odd mixture of heat and fascination surging between them. She was unarmed. He'd managed to wrench a small blade out of her hand during their tussle, but that seemed to matter less than the tilt of her head as she looked him over. Her name, as she finally offered, was Vryn. "What are you doing here?" he asked, stepping back to glance over the dusty corridor. Lights flickered overhead, and shadows stretched across the walkway. The outpost had been abandoned for years, the corporation that once ran it having packed up when the local mining veins dried. Now it was just a grave of corroded metal and shattered glass. "Hiding," Vryn said, so simply he almost doubted she was telling the truth. Her delicate fins, raised to catch ambient vibrations, trembled with an invisible tension. "From what?" he pressed. "Who hunts you?" Her silver eyes narrowed, and she traced a slender claw across the bite marks on his arm, as though checking her handiwork. The brush of her touch made his heart jump. She was both fierce and strangely gentle, and he felt that odd swirl of desire and wariness. "You see that cargo crate you came here with?" She gestured down the corridor where a battered container lay on a grav sled. "If it belongs to a corporate, you and I may share an enemy." "I'm just a pilot," he said, trying to rein in the confusion swirling in his chest. "I don't care about corporate wars. I just get paid to haul whatever worthless junk they tell me." "Then maybe it's time you started caring. They'll come for me. They'll come for you, too, now that you've got my scent on you." "Your scent?" He almost laughed. "Look, I've had enough trouble for one job. I don't need to get involved in some. In my culture, a bite can be significant." She cut in, dropping her gaze briefly. "I did it on instinct. Now there's a bond, one you can't simply ignore." Carr's stomach twisted. Something in her voice, a quiet vulnerability behind the bravado, made him hesitate. "What's your species?" he asked softly. She lifted her chin. "I'm called Saraxi. We used to be legion among the stars. Now we're on the run." She paused, as if remembering some painful past. "We have a claim-bite tradition. It's not always an act of romance. Sometimes it's meant for marking territory or forging alliances." I was half joking, half desperate. "But it's done now." "You're saying you claim me?" He couldn't help the skeptical hiss in his voice. "Don't flatter yourself. she teased, though her cheeks seemed to flush a deeper violet. It's an old ritual. I didn't intend to do it this way, but your blood is in me, and mine is in you. If others of my kind see this, they might think we share an oath. Your blood is in me? He resisted the urge to check the bite again. You do realize how insane this sounds. I realize you think me insane, she said, folding her arms across her chest. But you should also realize how serious it is. Certain Saraxi, especially exiles like me, are hunted. The corporations want what's in our genetic code. They think we have a key to some ancient technology. If they catch you now, they'll see my mark on you. They'll dissect you right beside me. A chill slithered down his spine. He'd done smaller jobs for the big corporate players before, but he knew how cold and relentless they could be. Let's say I believe you. What's your plan, then? Vryn's lips curved into a faint smile. Right now you're my plan. Help me get off this rock. I have a ship hidden not far from here, but I need a pilot. And you. She ran her gaze slowly over him, making him swallow. You're good enough to fly for them, so you should be good enough for me. That's a bold assumption. He felt a spark of indignation at her offhand tone, but also an undeniable flutter of interest in his chest. I'd rather you not sink more fangs into me. No more biting, I promise, unless you want me to, she said softly, so softly he almost wondered if he'd imagined it. Then she turned sharply, beckoning him to follow. Before he could argue, she was slipping away through the dark corridor, spines glinting in the flickering overhead light. He hurried after her, mentally cursing every step, because this was exactly the kind of chaos he'd sworn to avoid. But with the ache in his arm and the memory of her body pressed against his, he couldn't deny the inexplicable draw. Vryn led him through twisting hallways scattered with debris, broken crates, rusted scaffolds, piles of abandoned equipment. At one point, he caught the reflection of a security drone's cracked sensor, and an old flicker of paranoia gripped him. If any scanners were still active in the area, they might have recognized his corporate ID or flagged the presence of unauthorized biologics. His boots scraped over a patch of shattered glass, and Vryn glanced back with a cautionary glare. She moved so silently, her bare feet hardly stirring the dust. He wondered about her physiology, how her luminous markings seemed to shift with her mood, the gentle glow intensifying when she became alert. He wondered about the contact of her skin, how it would feel if she touched him without violence. You sure there's a functional ship here? He asked, more out of nerves than anything else. Absolutely, she replied in a hushed tone. But functional is subjective. It's old, and I've been rigging it with spare parts. It's not pretty, but it'll move. They came to a sealed pressure door that hissed as she pried open the manual latch. Inside was a storage room filled with tools, cables, and what looked like a partially assembled craft. Panels lay open, circuitry exposed. It was a small vessel, barely enough room for two if they squeezed close. You fly that? Carr asked in disbelief. I'm Saraxi. Our bodies handle a wide range of environmental extremes. The small interior doesn't bother me. The question is, will you handle it? I can fly anything with thrusters so long as it doesn't break apart in vacuum, he muttered, stepping forward to inspect the console. This was the moment he should have turned around, left her to her fate, and walked away. But a swirl of curiosity, and something far deeper drew him on. He recognized the shape of certain panels, older technology, probably from corporate surplus. She must have scavenged it herself. Carefully, he plugged in a power cell, testing the startup sequence. A series of lights flickered across the main panel. We'll need stabilizers. And a functional shield modulator. One hit from a corporate patrol and this thing'll blow. Vryn nodded, stepping closer until she was right behind him. He felt the warmth radiating off her. When she reached around to tap the console, her arm brushed his torso, and his heart thumped uncomfortably. She smelled faintly sweet, like exotic spices and burned ozone. We can salvage parts from the outpost's emergency stores, she said quietly, glancing up. In the harsh overhead light, her features were sharper, but there was a haunting beauty to the pattern of scales around her temples and the luminous stripes that glowed faintly across her collarbones. She was unlike any being he'd encountered, and he'd encountered plenty in his time as a wandering pilot. "All right," he muttered, forcing himself to look away. "But if we do this, we do it fast. I'm not up for dealing with corporate squads." "Neither am I," she said with a half-smile. "You're surprisingly calm for someone who was just bitten." He scoffed, rubbing the area around the bandage he'd hastily made. "I've dealt with worse. And you didn't bite that deep." She reached out as though to check his wound, and he jerked away on reflex. A flash of hurt crossed her face before she schooled her features back to neutral. "I'm not going to bite you again. You're bleeding slightly, though. I'll live." The dryness in his voice seemed to amuse her. "We Saraxi don't just bite anyone." She said it so quietly he almost didn't catch it. "You have no idea what it means to me." "Try me," he challenged, surprising himself. Her spines fluttered, and her luminous markings pulsed like a heartbeat. "The seriousness of a claim bite varies. It can be used to forge alliances or settle feuds. But in certain contexts, it's a sign of intense interest." "Interest?" He repeated the word as if tasting it. She lowered her gaze. "You're human. We're not particularly well known for cross-species relationships, but your kind has a certain rawness that Saraxi find compelling. Besides, I acted on instinct." She trailed off, her tone uneasy. "I'm sorry." For a fleeting moment, he felt the tension in the air shift, as though a new current had awakened between them. But the moment snapped when a distant clang echoed in the corridor outside, and both of them stiffened. "We need to move," she said, stepping back. "Something might be rummaging around out there." Carr nodded, part of him relieved to have a distraction. They collected what they needed: spare stabilizers, a shield modulator, extra wiring, and loaded it onto a small trolley. The entire time, his wound throbbed, and he was hyper-aware of Vryn's presence at his side. He could practically hear the blood pounding in his temples every time she brushed past. They worked in tense silence, occasionally exchanging glances. Once, they nearly collided as they both reached for a panel. Her hand pressed against his chest, and he stumbled backward, swallowing a rush of heat. She looked at him, color dancing across her cheeks. But neither spoke, and the moment passed. Finally, the trolley was full of supplies, and they returned to the makeshift ship. Outside, the corridor felt colder, as if the outpost temperature controls were failing with every hour. Carr's breath fogged, and he caught a glimpse of ice crystals forming along the corners of the corridor. "We've got maybe an hour before the environment system shuts down completely," Vryn said, voice tight. "We'll freeze if we're not gone by then." "We'll get out," he assured her, though he wasn't entirely confident. He crouched to install the stabilizers, hooking them into the engine housing. She handled the shield modulator with fluid efficiency. He couldn't help but admire how quickly she worked, how her delicate fingers moved across the components with practiced ease. Her spines, earlier flared in tension, now lay flatter against her back. Yet the bioluminescent lines across her body seemed to shimmer more brightly, as though excitement or anticipation pulsed through her. When she spoke again, her voice startled him. "What's your name?" "Carr," he said, glancing up from the wiring. "Just Carr." She cocked her head, as if sensing he had no family name. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. "I've met a few humans before," she said, sliding a piece of plating aside. "But none who were so quiet. Maybe I'm just not used to being bitten the first time we meet." He tried to keep his tone light, but part of him was being honest. Vryn half laughed. "You're not going to let that go, are you?" "I can't. Feels like it changed something." He let that linger. She didn't answer immediately, and in the silence, he connected the final wire. A hum of power resonated through the small craft. "There," he exhaled. "Try the main console now." She placed her hand on the control panel, slender fingers dancing across the readouts. The lights flickered, and a soft whir indicated the engines were booting up. Her face lit with relief. "It's working," she said, a small grin lifting the corners of her mouth. We can launch in a few minutes if the hull pressure holds. She turned toward him, eyes gleaming, but the grin faded when more clanging echoed from the corridor. This time it was louder, more purposeful. That's not a drone, Carr murmured, pushing himself upright. Does this outpost have security troopers? It shouldn't, Barren whispered. It's been abandoned, or so I thought. Another metallic bang reverberated through the corridor, followed by a hiss that might have been machinery or a mechanical exosuit. Carr felt his entire body tense with the old reflex of survival. We can't let them get to the ship, Barren said, her expression fierce. If they see me here. She didn't finish, but he understood. She was wanted, her genetics valuable. A half-constructed craft was a perfect trap. We'll have to face them, he said, grimly checking his sidearm. It was a shabby pistol, not enough to hold off a squad. She nodded and slipped out the storage room, moving with a predatory stealth that made his heart jump again. He followed, pulse hammering. They crept down the corridor. The overhead lights now flickered faster, as though the outpost's last gasp of power was giving out. Sparks leaped from exposed wiring overhead. The silence between each clang was worse than the sound itself, stretching his nerves taut. Finally they saw movement. A tall, humanoid shape lumbered through the corridor, wearing an exosuit with the emblem of a corporate security division. It was scanning the area, a rifle in its gauntlet grip. When the figure turned, its visor glinted in the half-light. Another shape followed behind, 2 guards, possibly more. Carr pressed his back to the wall, glancing at Barren. She mouthed something in her own language, perhaps a curse. He could see the tension in her stance, the coil of muscle as she prepared for a fight or flight. The guard stepped forward, scanning the air with an advanced sensor. Likely looking for signs of life, thermal signatures, anything that indicated a presence. Another guard came into view, scanning with a separate device. The lumps in Carr's throat turned to stone. They had to move fast. If they got caught in a firefight, they risked damaging the corridor or the outpost. But if they didn't fight, how else would they get to the ship? He turned to Barren, ready to sign something, but then the guard's gaze snapped in their direction. Intruders! A distorted voice barked through the helmet's speaker. A shot rang out, bouncing off the corner. Carr ducked, adrenaline flooding his system. He fired back, the blast of his pistol echoing painfully in the enclosed space. The guard stumbled, the exosuit's plating absorbing some of the impact, but there was a spark of electricity from a damaged servo. Barren hissed, leaped forward, and tackled the guard's arm in a burst of surprising strength. Her claws raked the suit's joint, sparks flying. Carr got off another shot, and the second guard fired a volley of pulses that scorched the walls. The entire corridor flashed with strobes of gunfire. A bullet ricocheted past Carr's cheek, narrowly missing him. Barren, with feline agility, slipped behind the first guard, using him as a shield. The second guard hesitated, not wanting to shoot his ally. Carr seized that moment to take aim. A well-placed shot struck the visor of the second guard, cracking the faceplate. The guard fell back with a groan, and Barren roared, the sound more primal than any human cry. She slammed her elbow into the first guard's helmet, denting it. The guard collapsed with a gasp as circuits fizzled. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. Carr stood, chest heaving. Barren straightened, the glow of her markings pulsing with adrenaline. She rubbed a bruise on her forearm, and he noticed fresh blood, maybe from the guard or from her own scrapes. We should go, he said breathlessly, hearing more footsteps in the distance. Now. They sprinted back toward the storage room. The overhead lights were nearly dead, leaving them in strobe-like flashes. Once inside, they slammed the hatch shut. Carr scrambled to the pilot's seat, Barren sliding into the narrow space beside him. The vessel was cramped, forcing their bodies to brush together. He smelled the metallic tang of her sweat, mingling with his own. Her breathing was ragged, as though she was holding back pain or fear. Hold on, he muttered, powering up the engines. Outside, muffled voices shouted, the clang of metal on metal reverberating. A dull thud shook the ship, possibly the guards trying to pry open the hatch. Go, Car! Barren urged, eyes flashing. He didn't need further motivation. He disengaged the clamps, and the small craft lifted precariously on its thrusters. Panels rattled, and for a moment he feared the ship would tear itself apart. But the stabilizers held, and with a roar of engines, they blasted through the overhead roof plating. Shrapnel and dust scattered. The outpost's weak structure buckled easily, and they burst into the open air of the planet's thin atmosphere. Carr wrestled with the controls as the craft shuddered and threatened to spin. The altimeter read dangerously low power, and his heart nearly stopped when the shield modulator flickered. Don't fail on me now, he growled, coaxing the engines. Next to him, Barren bit her lip, watching him with an intensity that sent a thrill through his core. The memory of her actual bite, that sharp flash of pain, flooded him once more. A surge of electricity, like a connection, thrummed through him. She had marked him, bound him somehow. You can do this, she said, voice low and resolute. I can see it in the way your hands move on the console. The way your jaw sets. He didn't dare respond. He needed all his concentration to pull the ship into a stable climb. As they broke through the thin upper atmosphere, the view outside the cracked viewport revealed a dark starfield. In the distance, the hulking shape of a corporate patrol frigate loomed, its lights flickering ominously. They're scanning us, Barren murmured, fear creeping into her voice. We need to jump to FTL. This ship doesn't have a standard hyperdrive, he muttered, frantically scanning the controls. You said it's Saraxi design? Yes, it has an old slipstream generator. But you have to let it calibrate. That'll take minutes. We might not have minutes. The frigate started to turn, aligning its massive silhouette with their trajectory. Sensors would be locking on, verifying who or what was fleeing the planet's surface. I'll handle that, Barren said. She slid from the seat, pressing up against him to reach the auxiliary console. Her thigh brushed his, sending a shock of awareness through his body. She was all lithe muscle and taut energy, a swirl of alien curves that made his heart stutter despite the crisis. Focusing, she tapped a sequence of alien glyphs that glowed faintly. Engaging slipstream pre-ignition, she announced. We just need to buy it enough time. A ping sounded, and a bright beam lanced out from the frigate, scanning them. Carr clenched his teeth. The comm crackled to life, a stern voice demanding they identify themselves. Another beep indicated the frigate had locked weapons. If they shoot before we jump, he muttered, but left the sentence unfinished. He pulled the ship into a sharp roll, engines sputtering as they strained against the hull's battered edges. A bolt of plasma sizzled past them, narrowly missing the port side. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring. More blasts lit the void around them, each one a near-fatal stroke. Barren clenched the console, luminous lines down her neck flaring in agitation. Focus on maneuvering, she urged. I'll force the calibration as fast as I can. Her fingers danced over the alien interface, the glyphs blazing in sequence. He risked a glance and saw a swirling diagram on the display, counting down from 30 seconds. Hurry, he breathed. Another shot clipped the tail, sending the craft spinning. He wrestled the controls, sweat trickling down his forehead. The spin was terrifying, stars blurred into a dizzying vortex. The inertial dampeners, barely functional, let him feel the full force. At his side, Barren gasped, bracing herself with one hand. We're close, she croaked, voice straining. He gritted his teeth, applying opposite thrusters to stabilize. The second he managed to level out, the calibration bar on the screen hit completion. Now! She shouted. He slammed a palm onto the slipstream toggle. Instantly, a wave of brilliant energy engulfed them. Space distorted, the stars stretching into threads of light. The last thing he saw was the frigate's cannon flare, but the blast never reached them. They vanished into slipstream, leaving real space behind in a violent ripple. For a moment, everything was silent, no alarms, no corporate guns. Just the swirl of slipstream energy around them, like a cosmic kaleidoscope that painted the cockpit in shifting colors. Carr exhaled a long breath, barely believing they'd escaped. We made it. He turned to Vryn, feeling something expand in his chest, relief, excitement, and a strange sense of shared victory. She smiled shakily, her lips parted to reveal the slightest hint of her fangs. I knew you could. You're better than those corporate grunts. Probably better than you give yourself credit for. His pulse hammered. He should have been focusing on the instruments, verifying they weren't about to tear apart in slipstream. But his eyes lingered on her, on the sheen of sweat across her brow, on the faint flush of color along her cheeks that signaled she was as charged as he was. That was too close, he breathed, feeling an aftershock of fear. Close is our life now, she said with a bitter laugh. For me, at least. This is what it means to be Saraxi in these times. Running, hiding, fighting. She pushed herself upright, stepping unsteadily on the cramped deck. Let me just confirm our coordinates. Carr swallowed, feeling the hum of the slipstream generator beneath his feet. He checked the readouts. Looks like we'll need a day or two of real-time flight after we exit slipstream to reach. Where are we even going? She looked over the swirling patterns on the console, then tapped a few more glyphs. A system on the outskirts of known space. There's a place called the Dusk Verge, where no corporate has official jurisdiction. We can hide there, get better repairs. We? The word was out before he could stop it. She glanced at him. You're free to leave when we land, of course. But the longer you stay close to me, the more heat you'll attract from those after me. If you run, I'll understand. Something in her tone suggested she didn't really believe he would run. Or maybe she worried he would. He closed his eyes, leaning back against the pilot's chair. The adrenaline still buzzed in his veins. They scanned the ship, he muttered. I'm sure they have some record of me. If I try to go back to corporate space, they'll probably throw me in a lab. The corners of her mouth curved with grim sympathy. That's what I was trying to warn you about. The claimbite complicates matters, too. Once they see you're carrying Saraxi markers in your bloodstream, it'll be even worse. Wonderful, he sighed. A swirl of conflicting emotions battered him, fear, anger, curiosity, and an undeniable magnetism toward this strange alien. It looks like we're stuck together, at least for now. Her gaze softened. I didn't mean to drag you into this. But I can't say I'm entirely sorry. He felt the weight of those words, heavy with unspoken tension. Neither can I, he admitted softly, surprising himself with the honesty. He reached into a compartment, pulling out a medkit. Let me see your arm. She frowned, glancing at the scrape on her forearm. A small rivulet of purplish blood stained her skin. It's fine. Let me clean it. Pay back for you biting me earlier. His attempt at humor made her smile. She stepped closer, letting him dab antiseptic on her wound. Her skin was warm under his fingers, the scaled texture surprisingly soft. The quiet between them was fragile, electric. She let out a small hiss of pain as he applied a bandage. Easy, pilot. This is me being easy, he teased. We humans are quite fierce, you know. You might have claimed me, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to roll over. The subtle glow in her eyes flickered. I like fierce, she murmured. Their gazes locked, and he felt the static charge in the air between them. Carr, she said, almost tasting his name. Before she could finish, the slipstream console beeped an alert. The entire cockpit trembled. He tightened his grip on her arm. What now? The slipstream generator is unstable, she said, quickly turning to the readout. I had to force the calibration. We need to drop out of slipstream early or risk a collapse. A wave of frustration whirled in him, but he nodded. Better to drop early than explode. She keyed in a sequence, and the swirling chaos of slipstream began to fade. He braced himself for reversion, which always came with a jolt. Sure enough, an instant later, they slammed back into normal space. The ship lurched, throwing him against Vryn, who staggered and clutched at his shoulders. He pressed a hand to the console, trying to keep them both steady. A dizzy moment passed as the engines whined. Finally, the starfield outside settled, revealing an unfamiliar stretch of cosmic emptiness. No planets close by, no sign of a station or habitat, just the silent glow of distant suns. "Where are we?" he asked, scanning the NAV system. She frowned. "We're in the outer cold. Not quite where I wanted to exit. We'll have to make a sublight journey and try a smaller jump again if we can fix the generator." "We have enough supplies?" "Just enough." Her eyes flicked across the cargo readout. "Oxygen for maybe 3 days, some basic rations. We can't linger." "All right, then let's see if we can make repairs." He turned to the diagnostics panel. "We'll need to patch the generator's stress fractures." She nodded, and together they stepped into the cramped rear section, rummaging for tools. The tension between them remained, but now it was overshadowed by urgency. They had to fix the ship if they wanted any chance of survival. Still, a strange warmth lingered in Carr's chest. He noticed how, even in the middle of a crisis, she moved closer than strictly necessary, as if drawn to him by an invisible thread. Hours passed in a haze of problem-solving and engineering. The generator was a patchwork of old Saraxi design and corporate salvage. They needed to isolate the damaged components, rewire some sections, and coax life back into the battered hull. At one point, they had to seal a micro crack in the hull plating to prevent slow oxygen leakage. All of this in near silence, with only the distant hum of cosmic radiation. Finally, exhausted and drenched in sweat, they took a break. The cockpit's meager life support kept the temperature bearable, but they could both feel the strain. The Arwaian slumped in the co-pilot's chair, letting out a shuddering breath. "I'll do a final check in a moment," she said. "Then, maybe we can try another small jump to get closer to the dusk verge." Carr nodded, rummaging in the supply kit for water. He handed her a canister. She drank, and he realized how parched his own throat was. After taking a few gulps, he slid down to sit next to her. The cockpit was so cramped that their shoulders touched. Neither pulled away. "You okay?" he asked softly. She shrugged, but her expression was weary. "I'm fine. This is nothing new for me. I've been running so long, I hardly remember what it's like to feel safe." A flicker of empathy stirred in him. He recognized that sense of displacement, of always looking over your shoulder. He'd lived on the fringes, drifting from job to job, never letting anyone in. "I understand," he said, letting more sincerity into his tone than he usually did. She turned her head, and their eyes met in the flickering glow of the consoles. "Do you truly? Because I know humans can't always relate to Saraxi ways. Maybe not fully. But I do know what it's like to have no home. Never to belong." Her features softened, and she exhaled slowly. "I guess biting you was not the worst thing I've done," she ventured with a tiny smirk. "Well, it's definitely the first time I've been claimed," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. But the word claimed sent a shiver through him, recalling how intense it had felt to have her teeth in his flesh. "I admit," she said quietly, "I didn't expect you to help me. You could have left me, or handed me over to them. Instead, you're here. You make it sound like I had a choice." He half-teased. "You bit me, remember? Marked me with your weird Saraxi claim bite. I'm basically done if I show my face anywhere corporate now." She winced. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," he said, surprising himself with how gentle he sounded. "Maybe this is the break I needed. Tired of carting their trash across the galaxy." She watched him, luminous eyes reflecting the faint lights. Without warning, she reached out and traced a claw gently along the bandage on his arm. The sensation made him shudder. "Does it hurt?" "It tingles," he admitted. Her fingertips lingered, a tremor passing through her. He realized how close her face was to his, how the faint luminescent lines curled across her cheekbone. The air between them felt thick, charged. "It's my fault," she whispered, voice trembling with a mix of guilt and something else. "Maybe," he said, letting his hand drift to her waist. He felt the contours of her scaled uniform, the slight give of the fabric over her sleek form. "But I'm here now, right?" She nodded, swallowing. He could practically hear her heartbeat in the hush of the cockpit. "Car!" she breathed like a plea. His mind whirled, caught between logic and the allure of something he'd never experienced before. She was alien, dangerous, and he was unbelievably drawn to her. The memory of her body pressing him to the floor of the outpost echoed through his muscles. He felt the urge to close the distance, to taste that sweetness on her lips that she said came from his desperation. Something in her posture invited him in, as if she were bracing for him to make a move. But before he could decide, an alarm blared on the console, snapping them both out of the moment. The ship trembled, and a half-dozen red indicators flashed. "What now?" he snapped, frustration flaring. The Arwyan lunged to check the readout. "A power surge in the slipstream generator. We pushed it too hard." She cursed in Syraxi, her fins quivering. "We need to vent some of the build-up or it'll blow." Carr jumped to his feet, pushing aside the swirl of longing. He dashed to the rear compartment, scanning for the manual release valve. The Arwyan followed, scanning the overhead controls. The vessel shuddered again, and a metallic groan signaled something was about to fail. She found the valve and twisted it. A hissing sound filled the cabin, followed by a sudden gush of hot vapor that flooded from the side panels. The space filled with a pungent smell, chemicals meant to stabilize the reactor core. Carr coughed, blinking away tears as the fumes grew intense. "Mask!" she barked, handing him a respirator from the emergency kit. He hurriedly strapped it on, and she did the same, their voices muffled behind the filters. Gradually, the hiss faded, and the alarms died down. The temperature dropped a little, and the readouts went from red to orange. "Crisis averted?" Carr asked, still coughing a bit. She nodded, pulling the respirator away from her face. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes bright. "We need a better fix soon, but for now we'll live. We can't keep patching crises," he muttered, sinking against the wall. His exhaustion warred with an acute awareness that they were truly alone, adrift in the void. The Arwyan took a slow breath. "We'll see if we can prime a short jump in a few hours. We should let the generator cool." He nodded, glancing around the cramped compartment. The overhead lighting flickered again, and for a second, they were left in near darkness, lit only by the glow of her markings. When the lights snapped back on, he saw the flicker of vulnerability in her silver gaze. "We should rest," she said quietly. "I can't believe it, but we have to. Our bodies can't handle non-stop crisis. I'll take the cockpit. You can have the floor," he joked, gesturing to the near non-existent space. She nearly laughed, then sighed. "I'll manage." In the end, either of them strayed far from the cockpit. The Arwyan curled up behind the pilot's seat, and Carr slumped in the chair, letting exhaustion weigh him down. He stared out the small viewport at the eternal night of space. Questions buzzed in his head. Why was she hunted so relentlessly? What secrets did her genetics hold? And why did he feel so acutely drawn to her, as if her bite had awakened something inside him? He flicked a glance over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of her half-hidden form. She lay on her side, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The glow of her markings had dimmed, as if her body shifted into a restful state. Briefly, he wondered about her biology. Did Syraxi dream? Did she dream of him? As exhaustion overcame him, he let his eyes close. In that liminal state before true sleep, he felt a phantom sensation of her teeth on his skin, a reminder that whatever was happening between them was as unexpected as it was inevitable. He drifted off wondering if, in the cosmic lottery of misfortune, he'd found something worth fighting for. Hours later, a flicker of warning lights roused him. He jolted upright, expecting another meltdown, but the console simply showed a low-power alert. The generator had stabilized for the moment. Groaning softly, he rubbed the crick in his neck from sleeping upright. Then he turned to check on the Arwyan. She was already awake, sitting quietly with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the darkness. When she noticed him stirring, she offered a half-smile. "You snore," she teased softly. "Must be the side effect of alien bites," he retorted, standing to stretch. Her smile grew, then faded into seriousness. The generator's cooled down enough for a partial jump. It won't be perfect, but it'll get us closer to the verge. Then we'll do it. He exhaled, mentally steeling himself for the possibility of another corporate ambush or mechanical failure. They had no real choices left, though. Let's see if we can patch some of the cracks before we go. They spent the next hour reinforcing the slipstream generator with the meager materials they had left, layering thermal tape over compromised sections and adjusting the coolant lines. It was a tenuous fix, but hopefully enough to push them a bit further. Finally, Ryan keyed in new coordinates. He strapped himself in, and she clung to the side of the seat, barely enough space for a second occupant. Ready? He asked. She nodded. Hit it. With a final, desperate flick of the switch, he activated the slipstream. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, just a whining noise. Then, with a thunderous crack, space split around them, and they shot forward into the swirling tapestry of slipstream once more. The entire ship groaned, but it held. Vibrations rattled through Carr's spine, and he gripped the controls with white knuckles. Just a few minutes, the Ryan said, eyeing the readouts. After that, we'll see where we land. The swirling riot of slipstream patterns glowed through the viewport, illuminating her face in wild colors. He could see sweat beading along her temple. For a second, the chaos outside mirrored the tumult inside him, fear, excitement, and the building tension he couldn't entirely define. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the readouts. The timeline for the jump was short, but every second felt like an eternity. The hull rattled dangerously, alarms chiming. Finally, the slipstream dropped them into normal space again. This time, the transition was even rougher. The craft spun out of control, sending them tumbling. The Ryan clung to him, her face contorted. The console beeped a proximity alert. Something's here. She managed to shout over the roar of thrusters. He fought to steady them, straining against the controls. His head spun, but the external cameras showed a swirling haze, some kind of asteroid field or dust cloud. After a moment, they broke into clearer space, and he let out a breath. We're near a small planetoid, the Ryan said, scanning the nav. Low gravity, but it might have enough resources to fix the generator if we can land there safely. Let's do it, he said, guiding the battered ship toward the rocky surface. On the approach, the engines sputtered ominously, but they managed a rough landing. The impact was jarring, sending a plume of dust into the thin atmosphere. When at last they settled, an eerie silence took over. We're alive, Carr murmured, unbuckling himself. The Ryan nodded, pressing a hand to her chest. Let's see if we can fix the ship properly this time. Then we can head for the verge. He looked out the viewport at the barren landscape, a pale, rocky terrain lit by a distant sun. No sign of civilization. A desolate place, but maybe that was an advantage. Corporate wouldn't find them easily here. We might also look for any natural resources that could help, the Ryan added. Siraxi scanners can detect certain crystalline structures that might help stabilize the slipstream field. If we're lucky, this rock has some. Lucky, he echoed with a wry laugh. Sure. Let's try. They gathered what gear they had and opened the hatch. A wave of cold air greeted them, along with the gritty smell of dust. The planetoid's gravity was slightly lower than standard, making their steps feel lighter. They walked a short distance from the ship, scanning the horizon. The sun cast elongated shadows, and the silence pressed in. Over here, the Ryan called, checking a handheld scanner that displayed alien glyphs. Her luminous lines brightened, reflecting her excitement. I'm picking up something that might be useful. Carr followed her across the rocky ground, boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The terrain was uneven, scattered with jagged outcroppings. Suddenly, Ryan stopped, kneeling beside a cluster of strange crystal formations that jutted from the ground like broken shards of glass. They glimmered in the weak sunlight, faintly purple in hue. Could be what we need, she said. We should harvest some carefully. She withdrew a small cutting tool and began to slice off fragments. Carr knelt beside her, offering a container. As she worked, he watched how her spines quivered with focus, how the markings on her neck shifted in color with her every motion. She was mesmerizing, a living tapestry of alien beauty. But he also saw the tightness around her eyes, the weight of fear and exhaustion. He wanted to help, to offer something more than just mechanical expertise. These crystals can store and release energy in a controlled manner, she explained, glancing at him. They're rare in corporate space. Saraxi learned to use them centuries ago, for slipstream stabilizers. If we adapt them to the generator, we might manage a stable jump. Her voice carried a hope that tugged at him. He nodded, gently lifting a piece of crystal into the container. Then let's do it. They spent the next hour collecting enough shards, meticulously examining each piece. The low gravity made the labor slightly easier, but the cold bit into their skin. The Arwayan shivered, hugging herself. Carr noticed and pulled a thermal blanket from his pack, draping it around her shoulders. She offered him a surprised, grateful look. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged. "I don't need my pilot freezing to death." "Then who'd fix the ship?" She gave a soft laugh, color returning to her cheeks. "Pilot, or claimed partner?" she teased, testing the boundaries of that word again. He felt a surge of heat. "I haven't decided," he said with mock nonchalance. But their eyes met, and the banter fell away into something heavier. She swallowed, the faint color on her cheekbones deepening. He realized how close they were, kneeling in the dust, bodies half wrapped in the same blanket. "Carr," she began softly, "I need to tell you something about the claim bite." He tensed. "I'm listening." Her gaze dropped to his bandaged arm. "There's a reason it's so feared among my people, especially in times of war or crisis. Once a Saraxi shares blood with another being, it forms a connection, a link of sorts, that can manifest physically and emotionally. Sometimes it's mild, just a sense of awareness. Other times, much stronger." A spark of concern lit in his chest. "What does that mean for me?" She drew a slow breath, letting the cold air swirl around them. "I'm not entirely sure. Each pairing is different. But you might sense my emotions or I yours. You might feel drawn to me even when it defies logic." His heartbeat fluttered. That explained the intensity he felt, the heat in his veins whenever she was near. "And if I want to break it?" She bit her lip, casting a glance away. "Then you'd have to kill me, or I you. That's the old tradition. There's no gentle way out. But many ignore the bond, live separate lives. It just lingers." Carr's chest tightened. "I'm not killing you." "I know." Her voice trembled, a mixture of relief and apprehension. "And I'm sorry for dragging you into that. It was the heat of the moment. I was frightened. I wanted to ensure you didn't turn me in. My instincts took over." He stared at her, thinking about how it felt when she pinned him down, that burst of primal contact. He recalled the flash of her fangs, the swirl of her exotic scent. Something in him recognized he was changed now, bound to a fate he hadn't chosen but couldn't entirely reject. "We'll figure it out," he said, hearing the hint of acceptance in his own voice. She nodded. Then, in a soft gesture, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. Her spines flattened in a sign of trust, and he felt the radiant warmth of her body. "Thank you," she whispered. "For not running, for not hating me." Her breath caught, emotion thickening her voice. "I've been alone for so long." He closed his eyes, letting the closeness lull him. He felt something in her chest echo in his own, a rhythmic resonance that tugged at his empathy, made him ache for her. Slowly, he lifted his free hand and cupped the side of her face. "You're not alone now," he murmured. They stayed like that for a breathless moment, letting the dust swirl around them in the cold alien wind. The intimacy felt fragile, precarious, but also undeniably real. Eventually, they pulled back, the awkwardness of the emotional moment dissolving under the necessity of returning to the ship. They had what they needed to try the final repairs. With renewed determination, they headed back across the rocky terrain, the faint light of the distant sun reflecting off the crystal shards they carried. The battered craft waited, half buried in dust from the landing. Carr retrieved the tool kit, and they began to integrate the crystals into the generator. Hours bled together in a silent, intricate dance of patchwork engineering. Viarwayan, guided by her Saraxi knowledge, slotted each shard precisely where it would best channel the energy flow. Carr handled the structural integrity, ensuring the patched metal held under the generator's strain. Through it all, he felt the undercurrent of the bond, like a delicate thread weaving their hearts together. He sensed her lingering fear, her hope. And he wondered if she felt his simmering curiosity, his unspoken desire. At last they finished. The generator hummed with a more stable tone, and the console's readouts glowed green. They exchanged a weary, triumphant look. "We should test it," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. She nodded. "We'll run a short jump, maybe just a few light years. Then if that works, we can try for the Verge." "Sounds like a plan." But as they prepared to lift off the dusty planetoid, an unexpected flicker appeared on the ship's radar. A faint signal, approaching from the darkness of space. Carr froze. "We've got a visitor." Viarwayan's expression hardened. "Could be a corporate scout. They're scanning for life signs." His heart pounded. "We can't outrun them on sublight. Should we hide, or if they land, they'll see our ship. We might only have one option." She locked eyes with him, jaw set. "We jump now." "But we haven't tested." A beep cut him off as the radar signal grew stronger. "No time," she said, bounding into the cockpit. He scrambled in after her, strapping in with frantic haste. The engines roared to life, dust swirling outside as they lifted off. The planetoid's weak gravity gave them an easy boost, but the real question was whether the slipstream generator would hold. Viarwayan keyed in the short jump coordinates. The overhead panel rattled, a testament to how fragile their repairs might be. Outside, the radar pinged again, and a shape loomed in the distance, a sleek, predatory craft with a corporate insignia. "Go!" Carr shouted. Viarwayan slammed the activation. The newly integrated crystals glowed, channeling arcs of energy through the hull. For a heartbeat, he feared an explosion. But instead, the space around them warped in a dazzling ripple, and they vanished into slipstream. This jump was smoother, more controlled. The swirling corridor of color enveloped them, and the structural alarms remained mercifully silent. Relief crashed over Carr. Viarwayan let out a shaky laugh, overwhelmed by success. "It worked," she marveled, brushing sweat from her brow. "The crystals stabilized it." He allowed himself a moment to exhale, then he glanced at her. "You're brilliant, you know." She chuckled, though tears shimmered in her eyes, tears of exhaustion, relief, or both. "We Saraxi learned to adapt to any crisis. That's how we survived this long." He reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he repeated softly, the promise that had bubbled up on the planetoid returning to his lips. She looked at him, silver eyes wet, spines trembling. The tension between them was thick, electric. He had no illusions about their danger or the fragility of their bond, but in that moment, he recognized they had crossed a threshold. Perhaps it was the near-death experiences, the forced intimacy of the claim bite, or the quiet truth that they were both desperate for some kind of connection. Whatever it was, he felt her leaning toward him as the slipstream swirled. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm going to kiss you now, if that's all right." "Do I have a choice?" he teased, heart pounding. She smiled, revealing a hint of fawn. "Not really." Then her lips met his in a hesitant, searching press. His eyes slid shut. He let the chaos of slipstream fade into the background, focusing only on the alien warmth of her mouth, the softness that contradicted her fierce exterior. A ripple of energy coursed through him, more potent than any adrenaline spike. He felt a faint hum in his veins, as if the claim bite flared to life. For a moment he tasted her breath, felt her tremble, sensed the swirl of relief and longing she carried inside. The kiss deepened, and he let out a ragged sigh. No overshadowing fear of corporate or exiles, no looming threat. Just the two of them, bound by chance and choice. When they finally pulled away, breath ragged, he noticed how her markings glowed brighter, the lines around her neck pulsing with the same frantic rhythm as his heart. She pressed her forehead against his, swallowing hard. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "We keep going," he replied, voice thick with promise. "We make it to the verge. We build a new life, or at least figure out how to stop running. Together?" Her voice trembled. Together. They lingered like that, wrapped in each other's presence, until the slipstream began to fade, and reality beckoned once more. The leap they had taken was more than just a physical jump across the stars. It was the first step into a future either of them could have imagined. The ship emerged into a quiet stretch of space. The NAV showed they were close to the Verge's outer boundary, a place rumored to be lawless yet free from corporate grasp. "We'll have to be careful," the Arwyan said, scanning for any sign of patrols. "The Verge might be free of corporate law, but it has its own perils." Carr nodded, letting her calm, steady voice anchor him. "We'll handle it." They drifted onward, the battered ship forging a path through the darkness. The threat of corporate pursuit lingered, but for the moment they had respite. Days passed in a blur of small repairs, cautious scans, and quiet conversations. They took turns resting in the cramped cockpit, sharing rations and stories. The Arwyan recounted the downfall of her people, how the Saraxi once thrived across multiple systems before corporate forces discovered their unique genetic gifts. The corporations had wanted to harness the Saraxi ability to interface with certain ancient technologies, rumored to belong to a lost civilization. But the Saraxi resisted corporate domination, leading to a brutal campaign to capture or eliminate them. Those who remained fled, becoming exiles, wandering from one hideout to another. "I was a technician's daughter," the Arwyan said one night, her luminous eyes fixed on the star-scattered void. "We kept our secrets hidden for as long as we could, but they eventually found our settlement. My family was taken. I got out. Been running ever since." Her voice quivered, and Carr's heart tightened. He placed a hand over hers, giving a comforting squeeze. "I'm sorry." She closed her eyes, nodding. "Me too." He wanted to offer more words, but none felt adequate. Instead, he slid closer, letting her lean against him. In the hush of the cockpit, they found solace in each other's presence, forging a bond deeper than any mere alliance. One evening, as they neared the Verge, the sensors picked up a small station orbiting a rugged planet. It looked to be a sort of trade hub, unregistered on corporate charts. The Arwyan suggested they might land, resupply, and learn more about the local environment. Carr agreed. If they were going to survive here, they needed contacts, information, and possibly shelter. So they approached the station cautiously, scanning for threats. A handful of mismatched ships orbited the structure, suggesting it was a haven for rogues, smugglers, and refugees, just the sort of place they might blend in. After exchanging a few coded transmissions, they received clearance to dock. The interior docking bay was cramped and dimly lit, filled with the pungent odor of engine fumes and sizzling metal. The Arwyan guided the battered ship into a free berth, and Carr shut down the engines with a soft sigh of relief. The hiss of the airlock indicated they had a stable environment, albeit a stale one. "You ready?" he asked, glancing at her. She pulled on a hooded cloak, tucking her spines beneath it to hide her Saraxi features. "As I'll ever be. Let's just hope we don't run into corporate mercs here." Together, they exited into the station's corridor. It was a dingy, labyrinthine place. Alien graffiti adorned the walls, flickering neon lights that buzzed with half power. Creatures from a dozen species scurried about, each seeming to carry secrets and scars. The hum of conversation in various tongues created a low, constant drone. Carr felt the hair on his neck prickle. They were stepping from one danger zone to another, but at least here it wasn't guaranteed corporate territory. "Let's find the market," the Arwyan murmured. "We'll need better supplies for the ship, and maybe we can glean some intel on where to hide next." He nodded, keeping a subtle hand on the sidearm at his belt. They wound through winding corridors, passing suspicious eyes and hurried figures. A pair of reptilian aliens hissed a greeting, while a tall, spindly merchant called out, hawking wares from behind a makeshift stall. They eventually reached a central bazaar, a wide chamber layered with scaffolding and platforms. Vendors sold black market weapons, questionable foodstuffs, and contraband tech. The air smelled of fried grease and exotic spices. Vryn led them to a corner where a stout mechanic was displaying a variety of engine parts. The mechanic, a squat, six-limbed being with a single large eye, eyed them warily. "Looking for ship components?" it rasped in broken trade language. "Or looking for trouble?" "Parts," Carr said, stepping forward. "Shield modulators, hull plating, maybe a better power distributor." The mechanic snorted. "Fancy talk. This is the Verge. What do you have to trade, human?" Vryn slipped a small container from her cloak, offering a few of the leftover crystals they'd gathered. The mechanic's eye widened. "Saraxi crystals?" it gasped, then squinted at her. "Where'd you get these?" Vryn pulled the hood lower, refusing to answer. The mechanic let out a low, knowing rumble. "You must be desperate, giving these up. They're worth more than my entire inventory. I can set you up with top-tier modules." Carr and Vryn exchanged a look. They needed the upgrades, but this would also paint a target on them if the mechanic spread word that someone was carrying rare crystals. Yet they had little choice. "We want the best shielding you can provide," Vryn said quietly. "And complete anonymity." The mechanic's broad mouth curved into a grin. "Anonymity costs extra." Carr felt tension coil in his gut, but Vryn handed over another small crystal shard. "Done." The mechanic's single eye gleamed. "All right, come back in a few hours. My people will arrange the modifications." "We'll wait nearby," Carr said, not wanting to leave the ship unguarded for too long. They stepped away from the stall, merging with the crowd. Once they found a quieter alcove, Vryn turned to him. "We should stay alert. That mechanic might be honest, or they might be calling every merc in the station." "Agreed," he said grimly, scanning the passing faces. "Let's get some food and keep a low profile." She nodded, and they purchased some skewers of grilled something, unidentifiable but edible, from a passing vendor. They perched on a ledge overlooking the bazaar, quietly observing. For a while, it was just a swirl of commerce and clandestine deals. Then, amid the chaos, Vryn stiffened. "Carr," she whispered, nodding toward a tall figure striding through the crowd, flanked by armed guards. It wore corporate insignia, though the uniform was battered, and the face behind the visor was hidden. "Mercenaries," Carr muttered, recognizing the swagger and the advanced weaponry. "They're looking for someone." The mercenary group paused at a stall, flashing a holographic wanted poster. The vendor shook its head, and the group pressed on, scanning the faces around them. Carr's heart lurched. "We need to move." "If they see you, yes," Vryn agreed, slipping her hood further down. They slid off the ledge and melted into the crowd, keeping to the shadows. He could feel her tension, as tangible as the blood in his veins. They tried to circle back toward the mechanic's stall to check if the modifications were underway, but the mercenaries fanned out, blocking the main thoroughfare. One of them, a tall soldier wearing a half-face mask, paused near their location, scanning with a portable device. Carr clenched his fists, ready for a fight if it came to it. But then an alarm rang out from somewhere else in the station, a brawl or a theft in progress. The mercenaries snapped to attention, moving away in a hurry. Vryn exhaled shakily, and they seized the opportunity to slip through a side corridor. The station seemed to twist endlessly, each passage leading to another cluster of vendors or living spaces. Eventually, they found a quieter corridor leading to an observation deck. The deck's viewport was cracked, sealed with a makeshift patch, but it offered a view of the planet below, a swirling mosaic of rust-colored desert and black volcanic plains. They leaned against the railing, catching their breath. "This is no safer than corporate space," Carr said bitterly. "No, but at least here, there's no centralized authority," she replied, brushing her cloak aside. "We have to endure it long enough to repair the ship." He nodded, turning to face her. The flickering fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on her features, but he could see the weariness in her eyes. Gently, he reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair, if Saraxi could call it that, away from her face. Her luminous markings, partially hidden under the cloak, glowed softly against his fingertips. The contact ignited that familiar tingle of the bond, a reminder of everything they'd shared. "You look tired," he said, letting concern soften his voice. "I'll be fine," she insisted, though he could sense her exhaustion. "I just need to finish this mission, get us somewhere safe. Then I can." Her voice caught. "I can figure out what comes next. We can figure it out together," he offered, swallowing the lump in his throat. She looked at him for a long moment. "I've never had anyone to share that burden with." He stepped closer, letting the quiet hum of the station surround them. "Well, you do now." For a moment she let him hold her in a gentle embrace, resting her forehead against his chest. Her spines lay flat, her body trembling slightly. He inhaled the faint aroma of her skin, that mingled scent of exotic spice and raw longing. She was so different, yet so heartbreakingly alive, and the bond that pulled them together felt stronger with each shared moment. "We should check on the mechanic soon," she whispered, reluctant to pull away. "Right. Let's go." They navigated back through the station, avoiding the route where the mercenaries had been. At the mechanic's stall, a few scrawny assistants were busy hauling parts. The mechanic waddled over, grunting. "It's done. You're lucky I had the right fittings." Carr inspected the new shield modulator and power distributor. They appeared legitimate, albeit old. "Thanks," he said, exchanging a tense look with Viarwayan. She gave the mechanic a final shard of crystal as payment, then they hurried back to the docking bay. There, they found the lumps of mismatched hull plating stacked near their ship. They worked swiftly to install the new parts, fighting the clock. At any moment, the mercenaries might show up. Even as they labored, the station's dull lighting flickered overhead, heightening their sense of urgency. Finally, the upgraded systems integrated. The generator readouts glowed a healthy green, the shield modulator tested nominal, and the power distributor synchronized with the slipstream's feed. Carr slid back into the pilot's seat, panting from exertion. Viarwayan, equally breathless, collapsed into the co-pilot's chair. "Let's get out of here," she said, voice thick with tension. "Back into the void?" he teased, but he was just as eager to leave. The docking bay airlock retracted, and they powered up the engines. The once battered craft now had a sturdier hum, thanks to the precious crystals and the new modules. Carr guided them away from the berth, aligning with the exit corridor. Just as they cleared the station's perimeter, an alarm blared on the comm. "Approaching vessel, halt!" a stern voice demanded. Scanners showed a small mercenary ship rising from a lower docking ring. Viarwayan cursed. "They found us. Then we outrun them," Carr snarled, pushing the throttle. The newly fortified engines roared, and they shot away from the station. The mercenary ship gave chase, firing a warning shot that sizzled past their hull. Viarwayan engaged the shields, and the modulator hummed to life, absorbing the next energy bolt. A wave of relief surged through them both. The upgrades worked. "Try to get us into slipstream," Viarwayan said, quickly adjusting the coordinates for the verge. "We can jump beyond their reach." The mercenary vessel unleashed another volley of shots, but the shields held. Carr banked sharply, weaving through the station's perimeter traffic, trying to use civilian ships as cover. The mercenaries hesitated, not wanting to risk hitting the wrong vessel. That hesitation gave Carr time. The slipstream generator spun up, the crystals channeling energy. He risked a glance at Viarwayan. She nodded, adrenaline shining in her eyes. "No," she said. He flicked the switch. Space warped, and they vanished into the swirling rainbow corridor. A startled curse from the mercenaries crackled over the comm, then cut off as they disappeared beyond normal space. The leap was smooth again, the crystals doing their job. This time, they had a full set of coordinates for the Dusk Verge, an unregulated system known for outlaws and lost souls. Perfect for Saraxi exile and her accidental human companion. Carr let out a breath, slumping in relief. "We made it again." Viarwayan reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she slipped it into his. "Thank you." "Truly." He squeezed her hand, the bond humming between them. "We'll keep making it," he promised, voice low but resolute. "No matter what they throw at us." She nodded, a new light in her eyes. "When we reach the verge, there might be Saraxi allies hiding there. If we can find them, maybe we can fight back. Maybe we can stop running. Then that's what we'll do." The swirling slipstream illuminated her face, accentuating the intricate patterns across her cheeks. Leaning forward, he pressed a lingering kiss to her knuckles, a slow burn of connection filling the moment. She softened, returning his gaze with a vulnerable intensity. "I'm yours, Car," she said, voice a gentle admission. "Claim or no claim, I choose this." Emotion churned in his chest, a fierce protectiveness warring with the old cynicism that once defined him. "Then we'll fight together." They stayed like that in the humming quiet, slipstream dancing beyond the cockpit glass, forging an unspoken vow. Whatever battles lay ahead, whatever corporate and mercenary forces pursued them, they wouldn't face them alone. They were bound by blood, by fate, by a love that crackled with danger and the promise of survival. And in that fleeting moment, locked in the swirling colors of the unknown, they found the strength to believe it was enough.